Day 28. How's it going? How's it going? It says there's only two people here. We got a couple of minutes. Oh, my lip is split again. Happy Easter weekend. I didn't think there would be that many people. I didn't think there would be that many people today, only because it's Easter weekend and people got things going on. I don't like these glasses, but I'm going to be reading shortly. So there, these kind of match my outfit. Hey, Ann Lewis, Joe Mama, and Jean Phillips. How's it going? All right. Welcome to Little House Live, day 28. And that puts us now. Remember, everybody, this is maybe what the series was based on, the name of Little House on the Prairie, and characters and all that. But remember, this book is mostly fiction. It's tales recounted from childhood, because in reality, when they were Indian territory, Laura was only 18 months old, right? So she was actually the baby, okay? So she may remember some things, but, they were filled. The 90% of this book is stuff that she's heard, right? All right, chapter 8. The wolves, the end of chapter 7 was the wolves might howl, but they could not get in while Pa and Jack were there. So at last Laura went to sleep. Chapter 8, Two Stout Doors. I saw that, Joe Mama. Look, I printed it off. And I wrote your name on there, Joe Mama. You know why? Because when I go to make those, I'm going to shout you out for the recipe. All right? So, hi, Lily Carter, Alexis Waller, Ann Lewis, Joe Mama. All right, Two Stout Doors. Oops, got to bend this page a bit. Laura felt a soft. Okay, wrong glasses. Those are my computer glasses. These are my bifocals. Okay. Laura felt a soft warmth on her face and opened her eyes into the morning sunshine. Mary was talking to Ma by the campfire. Laura ran outdoors, all bare inside her nightgown. There were no wolves to be seen, only their tracks were thick around the house and the stable. Pa came whistling up the creek road. He put his gun on its pegs and led Pet and Patty to the creek to drink as usual. He had followed the wolf tracks so far that he knew they were far away now, following a herd of deer. The Mustangs shied at the wolf's tracks and pricked their ears nervously, and Pet kept her colt close at her side. But they went willingly with Pa, who knew there was nothing to fear. Breakfast was ready. When Pa came back from the creek, they all sat by the fire and ate fried mush and prairie chicken hash. Pa said he would make a door that very day. He wanted more than a quilt between them and the wolves next time. I have no more nails, but I'll not keep on waiting until I can make a trip to Independence, he said. A man doesn't need nails to build a house or make a door. After breakfast, he hitched up Pet and Patty, and taking his axe, he went to get the timber for the door. Laura helped wash the dishes and make the beds, but that day, Mary minded the baby. Laura helped Pa make the door. Mary watched her. Laura handed him his tools. With the saw, he sawed the logs the right length for a door. He sawed shorter lengths for cross pieces, and then with the axe, he split the logs into slabs and smoothed them nicely. He laid the long slabs together on the ground and placed the shorter slabs across them. Then with the auger, he bored holes through the cross pieces into the long slabs. Into every hole, he drove a stout peg that fitted tightly. That made the door. It was a good oak door, strong and solid. For the hinges, he cut 3 long straps. One hinge was to be near the top of the door, one near the bottom, and one in the middle. He fastened them first to the door in this way. He laid a piece of wood on the door and bored a hole through it into the door. Then he doubled one end of the strap around the little piece of wood and with his knife cut round holes through the strap. He laid the piece of wood on the door again, with the strap doubled around it and all the holes making one hole. In other words, they lined up. Then Laura gave him a peg and the hammer, and he drove the peg into the hole. The peg went through the strap and the little piece of wood and through the strap again into the door. That held the strap so that it couldn't get loose. Excuse me. I told you a fellow doesn't need nails, Pa said. When he had fastened 3 hinges to the door, he set the door in the doorway. He fitted it. Then he pegged 3 strips of wood to the old slabs on either side of the doorway to keep the door from swinging outward. He set the door in place again, and Laura stood against it to hold it while Pa fastened the hinges to the door frame. But before he did this, he made the latch on the door, because of course there must be some way to keep a door shut. This was the way he made the latch. First, he hewed a short, thick piece of oak from one side of this. In the middle, from one side of this in the middle, he cut a wide, deep notch. He pegged this stick to the inside of the door, up and down and near the edge. He put the notch side against the door so that the notch made a little slot. He then hewed and whittled a longer, smaller stick. This stick was small enough to slip easy through the slot. He slid one end of it through the slot and pegged the other end to the door. But he did not peg it tightly. The peg was solid and firm in the door, but the hole in the stick was larger than the peg so that it could lift. The only thing that held the stick on the door was the slot. This stick was the latch. It turned easily on the peg, and its loose end moved up and down in the slot. And the loose end of it was long enough to go through the slot and across the crack between the door and the wall, and to lie against the wall when the door was shut. When Pa and Laura hung the door in the doorway, Pa marked the spot on the wall where the end of the latch came. Over that spot, he pegged to the wall a stout piece of oak. This piece of oak was cut out at the top so that the latch could drop between it and the wall. Now Laura pushed the door shut, and while she pushed, she lifted the end of the latch as high as it would go into the slot. Then she let it fall in its place behind the stout piece of oak. That held the latch against the wall, and the up and down strip held the latch in its slot against the door. Nobody could break in without breaking the strong latch in two. But there must be a way to lift the latch from the outside. So Pa made the latch string. He cut it from a long strip of good leather. He tied one end to the latch between the peg and the slot. Above the latch, he bored a small hole through the door, and he pushed the end of the latch string through the hole. Laura stood outside, and when the end of the latch string came through the hole, she took hold of it and pulled. She could pull it hard enough to lift the latch and let herself in. The door was finished. It was strong and solid, made of thick oak with oak slabs across it, all pegged together with good stout pegs. The latch string was out. If you wanted to come in, you pulled the latch string. But if you were inside and wanted to keep anyone out, then you pulled the latch string in through its hole and nobody could get in. There was no doorknob on that door, and there was no keyhole and no key, but it was a good door. I call that a good day's work, said Pa, and I had a fine little helper. He hugged the top of Laura's head with his hand. Then he gathered up his tools and put them away, whistling, and he went to take Pet and Patty from their picket lines to water. The sun was setting and the breeze was cooler, and supper cooking on the fire made the best smells that Laura had ever smelled. There was salt pork for supper. It was the last of the salt pork, so next day Pa went hunting. But the day after that, he and Laura made the barn door. It was exactly like the house door, except it had no latch. Pet and Patty did not understand door latches and would not pull a latch string in at night. So instead of a latch, Pa made a hole through the door and he put a chain through the hole. At night, he would pull an end of the chain through a crack between the logs in the stable wall, and he would padlock the two ends of the chain together. Then nobody could get into that stable. "Now we're all snug," said Pa. Pa said, When neighbors began to come into a country, it was best to lock up your horses at night, because where there are deer, there will be wolves, and where there are horses, there will be horse thieves. That night at supper, Pa said to Ma, "Now, Caroline, as soon as we get Edward's house up, I'm going to build you a fireplace so you can do your cooking in the house, out of the wind and storms. It seems like I never did see a place with so much sunshine, but I suppose it's bound to rain sometime." "Yes, Charles," said Ma. "Good weather never lasts forever on this earth." I'm glad this house is being built. What house? So that was chapter 8, and we're going to do another chapter. It's a fairly long one, but we're going to walk through the building of the fireplace. How's that going? Is everybody cool with that? Hey, how's everybody doing? Wow, there's 14 of us here today. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. When I get off here, I'm going to make a peach pie with canned peaches. All right. All righty. Fire on the Hearth. Chapter 9. Outside the house, close to the log wall opposite the door, Pa cut away the grass and scraped the ground smooth. He was getting ready to build the fireplace. Then he and Ma put the wagon box on the wheels again, and Pa hitched up Pet and Patty. The rising sun was shortening all the shadows. Hundreds of meadowlarks were rising from the prairie, singing higher and higher in the air. Their songs came down from the great clear sky like a rain of music. All over the land where the grasses waved and murmured under the wind, thousands of little dicky birds clung with their tiny claws to the blossoming weeds and sang their thousands of little songs. Pet and Patty sniffed the wind and whinnied with joy. They arched their necks and pawed at the ground because they were eager to go. Pa was whistling while he climbed to the wagon seat and took up the reins. Then he looked down at Laura, who was looking up at him, and he stopped whistling and said, "Want to go along, Laura? You and Mary?" Ma said they could. They climbed up the wheels, clinging to the spokes with their bare toes, and they sat on the high wagon seat beside Pa. Pet and Patty started with a little jump, and the wagon went jolting down the road that Pa's wagon wheels had made. They went down between the bare reddish-brown walls of earth, all ridged and wrinkled by forgotten rains. They went on across the rolling land of the creek bottoms. Masses of trees covered some of the low, rounded hills, and some of them were grassy open spaces. Deer were lying in the shadows of the trees, and deer were grazing in the sunshine on the green grass. They lifted their heads and pricked their ears and stood chewing and watching the wagon with their soft, large eyes. All along the road, the wild larkspur was blossoming pink and blue and white. Birds balanced on the yellow plumes of goldenrod, and butterflies were fluttering. Starry daisies lighted the shadows under trees. Squirrels chattered on branches overhead. White-tailed rabbits hopped along the road, and snakes wriggled quickly across it when they heard the wagon coming. Deep in the lowest valley, the creek was running in the shadow of the dirt bluffs. When Laura looked up those bluffs, she couldn't see the prairie grass at all. Trees grew up the bluffs where the earth had crumbled, And where the bare dirt was so steep that trees couldn't grow on it, bushes held on desperately with their roots. Half-naked roots were high above Laura's head. "Where are the Indian camps?" Laura asked Pa. He had seen the Indians' deserted camps here among the bluffs, but he was too busy to show them to her now. He must get rocks to build the fireplace. "You girls can play," he said, "but don't go out of my sight and don't go into the water. And don't play with snakes. Some of the snakes down here are poison. Just so you know, folks, snakes are not poison. You can eat them. They're venomous. Some snakes are venomous. Therein lies the difference." So Laura and Mary played by the creek while Pa dug the rocks he wanted and loaded them into the wagon. They watched long-legged water bugs skate over the glassy, still ponds. They ran along the bank to scare the frogs and laughed when the green-coated frogs with their white vests plopped into the water. They listened to the wood pigeons call among the trees and the brown thrush singing. They saw the little minnows swimming all together in shallow places where the creek ran sparkling. The minnows were thin gray shadows in the rippling water. Only now and again one minnow flashed the sunshine from its silver belly. There was no wind along the creek. The air was still and drowsy warm. Its smell of damp roots and mud, and it was full of the sound of rustling leaves and of water running. In the muddy places where deer tracks were thick, every hoofprint held water. Swarms of mosquitoes rose up with a clean, sharp buzzing. Laura and Mary slapped at mosquitoes on their faces and necks and hands and legs and wished they could go wading. They were so hot and the water looked so cool. Laura was sure that it wouldn't do harm just to dip one foot in, and when Pa's back was turned, she almost did it. "Laura," said Pa, and she snatched the naughty foot back. "If you girls want to go wading," Pa said, "you can do it in that shallow space. Don't go in over your ankles." Mary waded only a little. She said the gravel hurt her feet. She sat on a log and patiently slapped at mosquitoes. But Laura slapped and kept on wading. While she stepped, the gravel hurt her feet. When she stepped, the gravel hurt her feet. When she stood still, the tiny minnows swarmed around her toes and nibbled them with their tiny mouths. It was a funny, squiggly feeling. Laura tried and tried to catch a minnow, but she only got the hem of her dress wet. When the wagon was loaded, Pa called, "Come along, girls," and they climbed to the wagon seat and rode away from the creek. Up through the woods and hills they rode again, to the high prairie, where the winds were always blowing and the grasses seemed to sing and whisper and laugh. They had had a wonderful time in the creek bottoms, but Laura liked the high prairie best. The prairie was so wide and sweet and clean. That afternoon, Ma sat sewing in the shadow of the house, and baby Carrie played on the quilt beside her while Laura and Mary watched Pa build the fireplace. First, he mixed clay and water to a beautiful thick mud in the Mustang's water bucket. He let Laura stir the mud while he laid rows of rocks around 3 sides of the space he had cleared by the house wall. Then, with a wooden paddle, he spread the mud over the rocks. In the mud, he laid another row of rocks and plastered them over the top and down on the inside with more mud. Okay, so on the inside of the rocks was plastered as well. And the other side was the log wall of the house. With rocks and mud and more rocks and more mud, he built the walls as high as Laura's chin. Then on the walls, close together against the house, he laid a log. He plastered the log all over with mud. After that, he built up rocks and mud on top of that log. So against the wall, he's scraped the dirt away and he's built up rocks on the bare earth. All right. And then all the way up to the house, then he put a log on the outside of the house, and then he built the chimney on the inside like that. It took me a long time to figure that out. He plastered the log wall all over with mud. He plastered the log all over with mud. After that, he built up rocks and mud on top of that log. He was making the chimney now, and he made it smaller and smaller. He had to go to the creek for more rocks. Laura and Mary could not go again because Ma said that the ant bear might give them a fever. Laura sat beside Ma and sewed another block of her 9-patch quilt. Mary sat beside Ma and sewed another block of her 9-patch quilt, but Laura mixed another bucket of mud. Next day, Pa built the chimney as high as the house wall. Then he stood and looked at it. He ran his fingers through his hair. "You look like a wild man, Charles," said Ma. You're standing your hair all on end." "It stands on end anyway, Caroline," Pa answered. "When I was courting you, it never would lie down, so no matter how much I slicked it with bear grease." He threw himself down on the grass at her feet. "I'm plumb tuckered out lifting rocks up there." "Well, why don't you make it stick and daub the rest of the way?" she asked him. "Well, it would be easier," he admitted. "I'm blamed if I don't believe I will." He jumped up. Ma said, "Oh, stay here in the shade and rest a while," but he shook his head. "No use lazing here while there's work to be done, Caroline. The sooner I get the fireplace done, the sooner you can do your cooking inside out of the wind." He hauled saplings from the woods and cut and notched them and laid them up like the walls of the house on top of the stone chimney. As he laid them, he plastered them well with mud, and that finished the chimney, and I'm sure he plastered them inside as well as out. Then he went to the house with his axe, and he cut a hole in the wall. He cut away the logs that made the fourth wall at the bottom of the chimney. And there was the fireplace. It was large enough for Laura and Mary and baby Carrie to sit in. Its bottom was the ground that Pa had cleared of grass, and its front was the space where Pa had cut away the logs. Across the top of that space was the log that Pa had plastered all over with mud. On each side, Pa pegged a thick slab of green oak against the cut ends of the logs. Oh, okay. Then, by the upper corners of the fireplace, he pegged chunks of oak to the wall, and on these he laid an oak slab and pegged it firmly. That was the mantel shelf. As soon as it was done, Ma set in the middle of the mantel shelf the little China woman she had brought from the big woods. The little China woman had come all the way and had not been broken. She stood on the mantel shelf with her little China shoes and her wide China skirts and her tight China bodice and her pink cheeks and blue eyes and golden hair, all made of China. Then Pa and Ma and Mary and Laura stood and admired the fireplace. Only Carrie did not care about it. She pointed at the little China woman and yelled when Mary and Laura told her that no one but Ma could touch it. "You'll have to be careful with your fire, Caroline," Pa said. "We don't want sparks going up the chimney to set the roof on fire. That cloth would burn easy. I'll split out some clapboards as soon as I can and make a roof you won't have to worry about." So Ma carefully built a fire in the new fireplace, and she roasted a prairie hen for supper. And that evening, they ate in the house. They sat at a table by the western window. Pa had quickly made the table of 2 slabs of oak. One end of the slab stuck in a crack of the wall. The other end rested on short, upright logs. Pa had smoothed the slabs with his axe, and the table was very nice when Ma spread a cloth over it. The chairs were chunks of big logs. The floor was the hearth that Ma had swept clean with her willow bough broom. On the floor, in the corners, the beds were neat under their patchwork quilts. The rays of the setting sun came through the window and filled the house with golden light. Outside and far away to the pink edge of the sky, the wind went blowing and the wild grasses waved. Inside the house was pleasant. The good roast chicken was juicy in Laura's mouth. Her hands and face were washed, her hair was combed, her napkin was tied around her neck. She sat up straight on the round end of the log and used her knife and fork nicely as Ma had taught her. She did not say anything because children must not speak at the table unless they are spoken to. But she looked at Pa and Ma and Mary and at baby Carrie in Ma's lap, and she felt contented. It was nice to be living in a house again. Hey, hey, hey! What is a prairie chicken? A prairie chicken's basically some kind of partridge. You know, you have different partridges it's basically a partridge. It's basically a partridge. They're different for woodland partridges are different from prairie partridges and that kind of things. They're different breeds, but they're all called prairie chickens. Happy Easter. So, I hope you enjoyed Little House Live, Day 28. Prairie chicken is a wild cousin of the domesticated chicken. Okay. Pretty much what I just said. They're like partridges. You're welcome. Listen, guys, I can't stay to chat because we know this book is mostly fiction, but when we get into the banks of Plum Creek, we'll get back into more of the autobiographical side of this stuff. You're welcome. This is Bev from Reading with Beverly Wolfe, and thank you for joining me on Little House Live, Day 28. We'll see you next Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Mwah! Take care. God bless. I got a pie to make.